Hello and welcome to another episode of 1000 Actually Fun Books, where we're doing book reviews, trying to find the best of fun books of every genre. Today we're doing the book Cinder by Marissa Meyer. It is the first of a 4-book series. The series is called The Lunar Chronicles. It is a fantasy / sci-fi book that's follows along with the fairy tale Cinderella for a lot of its plot points. So let's start with what it is about, the plot. So Cinder is a cyborg. This gets into the science fiction aspect. She's a cyborg, and she is, just like in the Cinderella fairy tale, kind of the worker of her small family with a stepmother and 2 stepsisters. And her job is a mechanic, so she repairs things. And the story starts out with her sitting in a little booth in kind of an open market, trying to solicit business to repair various mechanical things. It can be a tablet, it could be a car, it could be a droid, whatever it may be. And in the course of that, the prince of the kingdom comes along and says, I have an android that needs repairing, please fix it. And she's, of course, flustered female, and he is interested in her. And as the story progresses, you find in the world building aspect that there is a plague going on, and cyborgs are being recruited. Now, sometimes they're actually voluntarily going to help, but sometimes they are involuntarily recruited as test subjects in trying to solve the plague. So they'll be infected with the plague, and various things happen to them to try and figure out a cure for the plague. So, as you can imagine, Cinder gets involved in this, in that her stepmother is kind of like, okay, we're done with you being here, you're gonna go be a test subject. So she ends up as part of the program, and through all of that, you still have that Cinderella aspect. She keeps running into the prince, and there's a ball that ends up happening, and he invites her to the ball, and she doesn't think she should go, and so on and so forth. So you have a couple of different threads going on here. You have the very light romance thread that you think of when you think of Cinderella. You have the thread of the plague and what's happening there in a political climate, kind of the big overall of what's specifically happening with Cinder. You also have a larger political climate in that there is a ruler of the moon who is apparently militarily, it could wipe out everybody on Earth if she so chose to do that. Instead, what she wants to do is she wants to marry the prince and thus begin her empire that way in her conquest of Earth. So she's putting a lot of pressure on the prince to marry her instead of what the prince wants to do, and he's very interested in Cinder instead. Okay, so I will be giving some spoilers throughout this, so just be aware. That's kind of the overall of the plot, but I'll give some details as we go along. And so let's start with things that I like. So I really like our main character, Cinder, and the prince. Both of them are fun. They feel pretty real for their situation for the most part. Real teenagers. There is, the heart fluttering, oh, he noticed me kind of thing going on, but the romance really isn't a huge part of this. It's kind of there, weaving through the background, but it's not the main focus for the most part. I liked the way the prince keeps repeatedly feeling that he needs to put his people ahead of his own personal interests, even if he really doesn't like that. I like how Cinder is not a vengeful person, even though she had plenty of opportunity to want revenge for various slights and bad things that happened to her. She's an interesting character. I liked the sci-fi aspects of this, although this is a very soft sci-fi. There are sci-fi things, but it's almost in a magical, oh, they have hover vehicles instead of combustion engine vehicles now, because it's sometime in the future, but you don't get any details on how they supposedly work. She is cybernetic in a lot of ways, but you don't get any details on how that actually could possibly work. I mean, is her brain mostly computer or not really? And how exactly does her computer tell her when somebody is lying or not? I mean, you don't know. It just magically happens. It's science, right? And it's very light. In fact, if it wasn't computer driven, I would call this a fantasy, not a science fiction. But since it's computer driven on the technology and stuff, it technically falls in science fiction, but very, very soft science fiction. Anyway, but I did like what there was of it. Okay, it was kind of interesting. It was interesting how mechanical stuff, the cyborg stuff related to the world around her. And which brings me to the world building. The world building was pretty good. So between the cyborg aspects of it, so she is a cyborg, but cyborgs are considered, I don't know, almost a non-class of people. They're almost property rather than people. Even if it's so much as, oh, you have a toe replaced, then oh my goodness, you're a cyborg, you're nothing, you're nobody, somebody has to be in charge of you as your guardian, even if you're an adult. And so there is that aspect of what's going on here where the world building makes for an interesting society. There's also the plague going on. So how do people react to that? There's a lot of prejudice against all sorts of different people. There's prejudice against those who have the plague, against the cyborgs, against the lunars, the people that live on the moon. Like, everybody that's not us is them, and them is, obviously horrible. And that can drive some interesting aspects of the romance going on, because the prince doesn't know what's going on with Cinder and that she is a cyborg. It's not obvious immediately, and she works really hard to hide it. So, how is he going to respond to the fact that she is this way and he doesn't know? So anyway, so back on track. The fact that it is a take off of Cinderella, I did like the Easter eggs that pop up because of that. So because it is based on Cinderella, there's certain points of the story that you are expecting there to be. You're expecting some sort of fancy dress. You're expecting some sort of shoe to get left behind. You're expecting a ball, right? You're expecting some sort of transformation of our character. And the author includes all these pieces, but has a unique bent on them. And so again, there's some spoilers here, but for example, the ball and her transformation. Okay, so she does put on a fancy dress, but she walks into this ball and her hair is sopping wet because it was raining outside. Her dress is wrinkled with stains. Her white, pristine gloves have oil stains on them. I mean, she is a mess and totally embarrassed to be there in front of all these fancy people. And the prince is kind of amused when he sees her. And so you don't quite get that fairy tale, oh my goodness, she's totally so glamorous, she's not even recognizable. No, that's not what happens. Instead, she's like just dressing up enough to get in the door for reasons that are part of the plot, and makes no effort to disguise her, and she's not the kind of gorgeous that everybody's like, oh my goodness. Instead, it's like she's a mess, so everybody's staring at her because she's a mess, not because she's so beautiful. So it's still got those elements there that you recognize from the fairy tale, but it's twisted in such a way that it makes it for an interesting story. It's not always predictable in how that story plays out. So I liked how the author did that. I liked that a lot. It was fun to have the Easter eggs of things from the original because it felt like, you're like, oh, I caught that, I see that. But it's not so predictable in that you're like, oh, I know exactly what's going to happen. Having said that, because it does have that Cinderella aspect, there are definitely some heavily foreshadowed things in it. So she comes across very early on in the story an old junker car with a really ugly paint job of yellowish orange. And you who know the story know immediately what's going to happen with this car. And this isn't a big spoiler because it's really obvious from the beginning because you know the story of Cinderella and because of it's pretty well laid out what's going to happen. But she is going to restore this car and she's going to go to the ball in this car. And so some aspects of it, because you know the story, it falls into more predictable than it does fun. But some, like the dress going to the ball, it was more fun than predictable. So it kind of had that, sometimes it was well done and sometimes it was like, okay, you know what's going to happen. Okay, some other things I liked. I liked the plague thread throughout the book. It made it feel like there were some real risks going on. You know, it was the real tension, real drama. Like, the prince actually had a reason why he's maybe gonna end up having to marry the Lunar Queen, not just the military threat, which feels very vague, but the plague that's going on, which feels a lot more immediate because the story actually focuses in on some people who are dying of this plague. So it did feel like there were actual risks going on there. I will say, though, on the negative aspect of that because of the plague situation, there are some darker aspects of this book that it kind of feels almost jarring to get into it. So you're going along and it feels like light and fluffy, and then you have this really dark moment involved with, medical research on an unwilling victim that you're just like, that's really ugly. And the people that die of the plague, it's kind of like, that's ugly, up close kind of view of what's happening. So there are definitely some darker aspects of the story. It is in the young adult category, and it feels young adult. Like, it doesn't feel super adult in genre as far as the depth of character or anything like that, but some of those dark aspects of it definitely bump it up out of the juvenile fiction section. Anyway, so some other things I didn't like was mostly the predictability. So the car was one aspect of it. Here is another spoiler, but again, it was set up so obviously that you were like, oh yeah, that's what's going to happen. Okay, the Lunar Queen her niece died at age 11. She is missing, and right at the beginning, you are told that there are rumors that she survived somewhere, and you find out that the prince is looking for the lost princess, and you sit there and go, who could the lost princess be? I wonder, right? I mean, that's going to be pretty obvious on who that is, right? So things like that it's so predictable, and the book handles that in a very heavy fashion. Like it handles it like it is going to be such a huge secret, and the reveal is going to be such a big, heavy surprise, but it's not. And so because of that, you as the reader are kind of going, oh yes, I figured that out, like on page 2. Not quite, but pretty close. So I didn't particularly like the level of, lack of predictability in some of those things. It's more the small details that were unpredictable and made it fun, not the big plot moments. Okay, another thing I didn't like is there's a doctor. The medical aspect of the plague, I said, had some darker moments, and I didn't like the main doctor that's involved in that, nor Cinder's kind of relationship with him, because it starts out as a really dark moment when he's kind of introduced. She is like strapped down and going to be experimented on and probably going to die. And he's totally indifferent to this. Yeah, whatever, just inject her, let's get going. And when she doesn't die, he's more like, oh, well, let's, get more involved. And because that's what's happening here, he's not a very likable character, right? The doctor, you're just like, ooh. And yet, the story doesn't treat him as unlikable as it should. Like, once he comes onto Cinder's side and starts helping her, it's like, all is forgiven, all is well. And to me, I'm sitting there going, yuck. I didn't like him as a character, and I didn't like the way the book handled him and the darker aspects that went along with that. I will say the oppression, the prejudice, the abuse that's going on in this book Again, those darker aspects of there, it's not so bad that I would recommend against reading the book, but they're definitely there, and I don't really like those kind of things in a book. I would have liked it to be a little bit more fluffy. So those are there. They're not bad, but they're there. And the last part I would say that I didn't really like is the ending was a little bit, I wouldn't quite say abrupt. I mean, you definitely have an ending to this, but it's kind of like, stay tuned for next episode kind of feel to it, because it ends and not quite a cliffhanger, but definitely very clearly things are not resolved, and you're expected to read book 2 to know what happens to these characters. This is not and they lived all happily ever after. No, it is more like, okay, they're at a point where they're approaching the cliff, and what are they going to do? And so, if you're looking for a standalone book, I wouldn't highly recommend this for that. But it is only apparently a 4-book series. There are a couple of, I guess, books that are kind of associated with it. Like one is the point of view of the bad guy, I guess, and another one a bunch of short stories, but whatever. Overall, I would say I would give this a thumbs up. I'm going to recommend the book. I thought it was fun. It was a unique idea for dealing with a very old, very well-known story. Cinderella is actually the fairy tale that is most well-known around the world. It's in a lot of different cultures as a very ancient tale, some variation of Cinderella. It's considered one of the most universal fairy tales in the world. So this being a unique take on it is pretty nice, and it's well done for what it is. It's fun. It's a quick read, enjoyable. I liked the characters. I was involved in the story. I wanted to come back to it when I set it down. All the things you want in a tale. So I recommend it. I would be interested in reading the next one to find out what happens to our characters. So yeah, overall, thumbs up. Part 2, I'm going to do a historical fiction next. I'm going to do I think it's pronounced Nefertiti. I'll have to double check how to pronounce her name. But The Ancient Queen of Egypt by Michelle Morin. And so I thought, I've done a couple of historical fiction, but nothing ancient history like, actually that's not true. I did a biblical history fiction one. So anyway, doesn't matter. Ancient Egypt sounds fun. So I'm going to try that next. I hope that you enjoyed this and will join me next week. Thank you for watching.